Right now, we want to bring in KHOU 11 News political analyst Bob Stein, who has been following the presidential race closely, especially what is happening in Pennsylvania. So, Bob, people went to bed on Tuesday with President Trump carrying a considerable lead in Pennsylvania. What's changed?
Nothing. I want to make this absolutely clear to all our listeners. More votes were cast in Pennsylvania by mail. No votes came in late. Nobody voted after election night. Those mail ballots were received before the end, most of them, before the end of voting on Tuesday. What changed was that because there were so many ballots delivered by mail, and the state legislature refused to allow election officials to open and certify and tabulate those ballots before the end of election day. They had to begin on election night. What state in the U.S. does this? Texas allows all of its mail ballots to be opened, certified, and counted. The Republican state legislature refused to consider a request from the governor to process mail ballots as they arrive. There is no late voting in Pennsylvania. Those votes that allegedly are, according to the president, coming in late, came in early. They came in before election day voting. Only votes that were reported on election night were the votes that were cast in person early or on election day. The mail ballots could not be opened, certified, tabulated, counted, and released until the beginning of the end at 8 o'clock on Tuesday. There are no late voting. They were ballots there well before anybody voted on Tuesday morning at 7 o'clock in the Keystone state of Pennsylvania. There is a myth here that these are votes that are coming in late. It takes longer to count mail ballots. And as Senator KHOU said last night on another network, we do it right in Texas. And he's absolutely right. And there was no reason why Pennsylvania couldn't have aped what Texas does.
So thank you for clearing that up. The ballots were there. They just got a late start counting the ballots, again, that were already there. Bob, the race, in Pennsylvania is razor thin right now. Could it be headed for a recount?
If the state law requires that, I believe, I could be wrong, it's either a percent or less difference between candidates, they can request a recount. And I believe in Pennsylvania, the candidate making the request has to pay for the recount. I'm relatively certain there'll be recounts in several states, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Yes, I'd be surprised if those recounts are significantly likely to change the election. But at this point, it depends on how close that race is in Pennsylvania.
All right, Bob, thank you so much. Our KHOU 11 political analyst. We appreciate your insight.